Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Did you know that all mammals should poop in 12 seconds? Did you know that any given moment, up to 100 million Americans are experiencing constipation? This often overlooked condition affects nearly 30% of the Okay, start again. Did you know that all mammals should poop in 12 seconds? Did you know that any given moment, up to 100 million Americans are experiencing constipation? This often overlooked condition affects nearly 30% of the population, with prevalence increasing to 60% as we age. Today, we're joined by Dr. Carmen Fong, a distinguished colorectal surgeon and author of Constipation Nation: What to Know When You Can't Go. Dr. Fong brings a wealth of knowledge and a compassionate approach to a subject that significantly impacts our daily lives, yet remains shrouded in stigma. In this episode, we'll delve into the science behind constipation, debunk prevalent myths, and explore practical strategies for maintaining optimal digestive health. Whether you face digestive challenges or are seeking to enhance your well-being, this conversation will be transformative. Dr. Fong, welcome to the Superhumanize podcast. I am delighted to have this conversation with you. Super important topic.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, absolutely. And when I was made aware of your body of work, and I was basically lifting my hands in hooray because it's such an important topic and one that doesn't get talked about enough. Constipation has been, that's our topic, constipation, and it has been truly a persistent issue throughout history, even inspiring figures like Nikola Tesla to devise solutions. And in your book, you touch upon the history and also the science of this condition. So to start out, Dr. Fong, can you share any fascinating historical anecdotes and what they reveal about society's ongoing struggle with digestive health?
Yeah, I think my favorite one is actually the one that you mentioned, which is that Nikola Tesla and Mark Twain were good friends in the late 19th century. And Mark Twain was known to be like somewhat constipated because the diet back then tended to be like meats and potatoes, not a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. And so they actually like visited each other when they lived in New York City. And there was one day when Mark Twain went down to Tesla's lab. And Tesla had invented this thing called an oscillating machine. And what we know is that he had Mark Twain step on his oscillating machine for 2 minutes, which essentially shook your whole body. And the thought was that it induced like gut motility and made the stool move through a little bit quicker. And in 2 minutes, Mark Twain jumped off the oscillating machine and went to the bathroom. We've been dealing with this for like over as long as humans have been around, honestly. And as long as Western civilization has been around, it's also been talked about as like the Western curse or the white man's curse because of the changes in our civilized diet that tends to not have as much fruit and vegetables.
And with modern science now, we have more insights into the underlying mechanisms of constipation. And how would you explain in layman's terms what constitutes constipation? What are the causes, the physiological process behind constipation, and why is it so complex to treat?
Oh, great questions. And honestly, I talk about this with my patients all day, 20 times a day, and I never get sick of talking about it. So constipation can be, there's like a proper criteria, but when I explain it to my patients in layman's terms, it tends to be you're having difficulty pooping, right? Like very simple. You can't poop. You poop less than 3 times a week. Or when you poop, it tends to be hard, or you tend to feel like you need to strain, or you're sitting on the toilet for a long period of time. Those are the most common definitions. The causes of constipation are multifactorial, like you said, and that tends to get a little more complex because we have several systems going on, right? You have the anatomy, which is like the colon and the rectum and the pelvic floor muscles, which all have to work in coordination to produce like the perfect poop. And then you have the physiology, which is your colon and small bowel, stomach, and all of these things that have to work to absorb the foods, absorb the nutrients, absorb the water that you eat, ingest. And then all of it has to form like a stool that goes through. So and then lastly, there's also like the behavioral aspect, which is that what we mentioned before we started the program, people these days are trained to not poop, right? Because we don't like to talk about it. And so even at a young age, when we potty train, we're like, hey, either you sit here till you poop, and when you do poop, we're going to say, ew, stinky, and shame potty training or whatever bodily functions we have. And so we grow up as adults and go into the world and say, okay, we're not going to poop when we're at work. We're not going to poop in public. And your body actually has this muscle memory where it's called a paradoxical contraction. And literally your muscles will tighten whenever you have to poop, which is the opposite of what it should do. It should open when you have to poop. I deal with that a lot, like a pelvic floor dysfunction. So the three main things: anatomy, physiology, and the psychosocial aspects.
Yes, and Dr. Fong, what you just touched upon, I think it's so fascinating how something so natural, which we all do every day, or hopefully we do every day, not just 2, 3 times a week, has become
Right.
so taboo. And it's really to our detriment. And bringing these conversations into the mainstream is, I feel, as important as addressing the issues that you address on a daily basis when there's a need, when there's a medical need. And this poop shame, from the potty training to the pressure to hold it in public. I have so many friends, and more often even the female friends, that feel like they gotta hold it. You cannot do this in public. We have, I know from friends who live in Japan, that a lot of the public toilets, you actually even have music in order to have people feel more comfortable. And I guess that's a good thing in a way, so they don't feel like their noises travel because it inhibits them. So in a sense, it's good because it supports people to feel more comfortable. In another way, again, it's shaming, right? These natural processes. In your practice, Dr. Fong, maybe obviously, but keeping details private that need to be kept private, but have you seen some of the more crass examples where these behavioral pressures have translated to really bad physical health outcomes?
Yeah, 100%. It's actually super common these days. And I really wrote the book because after COVID, I was noticing more anal rectal problems that people were having. And stress has a lot to do with your physiologic function. Obviously, as we know, it impacts your immune system, it impacts your GI system, and it impacts your pelvic floor. I've had quite a few patients these days, and like you mentioned, happens slightly more often in women. They have done studies that actually happen slightly more in women and men who identify as men who have sex with men, because they are more subject to the societal pressures than apparently heterosexual men, which is strange. But they did that study, and that was one of the ones I quoted in my book. And so the worst thing that happens with holding your poop in public is usually anal fissures. Like hemorrhoids are pretty common because they can cause painless bleeding, swelling, itching when you sit. But when it becomes painful, that's when patients are like, oh my God, I have to see somebody. And fissures are a little crack in the anoderm. So literally the muscles are squeezing so tight that there's no blood flow going to that anal skin, and that crack can't heal. And the way to actually heal that crack is through a compound ointment, sometimes Botox injections, physical therapy, and if we have to, we do surgery. But all of those things are meant to relax that pelvic floor muscle, which is from a combination of like stress, chronically holding your poop and your farts in, and then on top of that, like obviously dietary things and exercise. But super, super common. It's probably one of the most common things I deal with.
So what right now, a word that really jumped out to me is Botox injection. So that is to relax the pelvic muscle. How does that look like? Where does that get injected? What are the effects after?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And like I said, we've been doing more of it lately. So Botox, it's the same stuff that goes into your face, into your wrinkles, And it works the same way because it relaxes the smooth muscle. We inject it into the internal anal sphincter. So the internal anal sphincter is involuntary control of your bowel function versus the external sphincter is voluntary control. And most of the time when people have a problem, it's the internal anal sphincter that is too tight. And so by injecting it either in either side of the fissure or in left and the right, sometimes people do anterior and posterior. We put about, it's anywhere between 20 to 200 units. I do an average of about 100 units per patient. And it relaxes that sphincter for 4 to 6 months, just enough so that fissure can heal. Because again, primarily the pathophysiology is that the muscle is too tight. It's squeezing and constricting the blood vessels. There's no blood going to it, so that fissure can't heal. So if we relax it enough, the fissure heals, and then we go on from there. Some people need a second injection 3 to 6 months after the first one. It's pretty rare. The latest studies are that it's 80 to 85% effective. And in my practice, I almost always do that before we do a sphincter cutting surgery, which used to be the standard of care.
Wow. Yes, and that makes a lot of sense, Dr. Fong. And for people who may be worried about, oh, but then can't I control what happens down there? Can't I control my sphincter anymore? That's not a worry to have because obviously it would be the outer sphincter muscle, which you still have
Yeah,
control.
so we still quote less than 2% chance of fecal incontinence. And I find that's in two things. Like people who already had a weakness in the external anal sphincter, if you're loosening the internal anal sphincter, then you just have like very little control. And or the Botox was injected in the wrong place, which is common, right? Because the muscles are right next to each other. But yeah, so there is still a slight risk. And but I always tell people, even if there is a risk, whether you do it with me or with anybody else, the risk goes away. Like in 4 to 6 months, the Botox wears off, and then hopefully you will resume continence. Thankfully, I have almost never seen the actual like incidents of incontinence.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
And some things that are striking are some about the misconceptions and also the long-held myths around constipation.
Right.
A lot of people, for example, believe they can fix constipation just by eating more fiber or drinking more coffee. And share why these more simplistic approaches might not work, and also the risk of relying on these so-called quick fix methods.
Yeah, I'll start with the fiber. Fiber, people are like, oh, eat more fiber. And part of the reason I wrote the book was because we, as physicians, would tell people eat more fiber, but we would never say how much or what kind of fiber. And patients would be like, what kind of fiber or what has fiber in it? They'd be like, does chicken have fiber in it? Which is fine. I don't expect everybody to have all the answers, but I was like, I want to have all the answers. And so through my research, it's basically that you need to have 25 to 35 grams of fiber, both soluble and insoluble fiber, so in the form of like whole grains, wheats, and stuff like that. And then obviously fruits and vegetables. A really good example that I like to use is an apple, because the inside, the flesh of an apple has a lot of pectin, which is soluble fiber, and the skin is insoluble fiber. The soluble fiber provides the roughage that kind of irritates the colon, makes everything push through and like traps everything and pushes it through. But the pectin also acts like a glue to hold the stool together and pull everything out. And so that's why when you read labels like, oh, oatmeal helps with like cholesterol, it does, because it traps all that bad fats and pulls it out with it. So the one problem is people will come and they'll say, hey, I'm eating fiber. How come I'm not pooping yet? And I'll be like, what kind of fiber are you eating? And they'll be like, oh, I eat a ton of kale salads all day long, like raw kale. And I'm like, okay, that technically should work. But I've actually seen a bunch of people who eat too much fiber in the form of raw kale. And so you only have roughage and it's not pushing through. And when you only have the insoluble fiber, it kind of forms into a fiber like stool ball. So that can happen. Or you eat too little fiber, or you only eat insoluble fiber, which is in the form of it gels into your colon. And I always tell people that fiber without water turns into concrete in your colon and it just won't move through. So you actually have to do fiber and then 2 types of fiber, and then drink 2 glasses of water immediately after you take your fiber supplement to wash it all through. That's how fiber works. It needs the water to work. So that's the first thing. As you can see, like I talk about this stuff like all day long.
I love it. Your passion and dedication clearly comes across, Dr. Fong. And again, this is so important. When we can't poop, will
Yeah.
not help.
I have a psychiatrist friend, and when she heard about what I was doing, she was like, if we can't sleep and we can't poop, like you're just miserable. Like those are like the very like two very important like basic human functions. And I think in our society, we don't get enough sleep and we probably don't poop regularly enough.
So what, and every body is different, but
Mhm.
if is there a heuristic? What would be a good amount to poop, let's say on a daily or weekly basis?
Yep. So the normal human like physiology, my rule of thumb is 1 to 3 times a day, every 1 to 3 days. And I made it pretty easy to remember because less than 3 times a day, you're starting to, or sorry, less than 3 times a week, you're veering onto being constipated. And then if you're pooping more than 3 times a day, it ends up being more diarrhea-like, and you might be pooping too much. And if you're not pooping every day, that's okay. So 1 to 3 times a day, every 1 to 3 days is the rule of thumb.
Good. I poop about 2 times a day. So
And most people do or should,
yeah.
because like our bodies are made to actually have a bowel movement about half an hour to an hour and a half after each large meal. And so if you're like, hey, I have big breakfast and I go poop, or have big dinner and I go poop, that's what it should do. I think what we have forgotten as a society is that we're allowed to go poop. And so if we're super busy at night, you're running around with the kids, you're like doing stuff, you're going out or whatever, you ignore that signal to have your second bowel movement. And then in the morning, you have a really tough bowel movement. That is a pretty common story as well,
So why is it tough in the morning then?
because it's already started to dry up and
Mm.
you lost that signal, and so you're waiting for that second motility cycle to go have that second bowel or that first bowel movement of the day.
That makes sense. I have actually experienced that.
Right?
And
Yeah. Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Now I understand. And the fortunately, only other times for myself when I have a tough bowel movement or
Mhm.
it's constipated is the few times when I just say F it and indulge in, let's say, I know it's not great, but
Yeah.
there's some days, sometimes, maybe every couple of months or so, when I feel like I am an adult, I can make my own decisions on what I eat. I usually eat a whole foods, plant-based diet that serves me really well. But again, every couple of months, I might have a day where I think it's a very smart idea to just eat croissant,
What?
for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Exactly.
then I will notice, I already know within the next 24 hours, my bowel movements are not going to be ideal. It's the price
No,
I'm
and that's totally fine. And I always tell people if it's happening once a month, once every couple months, when you indulge a little bit more, that's not chronic constipation and that's within the normal human range. I think that there are ways to combat that, but even then, I would just accept like once every couple months is okay. The way to combat it though is as always, you are already on a very good diet, exercising regularly, and then the other thing is having probiotics, which help with the regularity and the frequency. So if you're going into a weekend of indulgence with a good regimen, falling off the wagon for that 1 day or two, you get back on the wagon a lot sooner, right? So you have 1 or 2 tough bowel movements and then you get back on. Versus if your bowels were already up and down and all over the place, it takes a lot longer to fix it.
Yes, Dr. Fong. And speaking about probiotics, that of course
Mhm.
brings to mind the gut microbiome, and there's so much emerging research also with regard to the gut microbiome and its effect on overall health. How does the composition of our gut microbiome influence our bowel movements, and what are some actionable ways to support it for better digestive health?
Yep. And I looked, there was a whole lot of research into probiotics, and I really considered whether I should put it into the book. But the more I read, the more I found that while there's no firm evidence that anyone is recommending probiotics, there's also no evidence like really against it unless you're immune compromised. And from what I found, it actually is that there are certain strains that are helpful, and having a good variety of probiotic strains is helpful to your digestion. So for example, lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, having those strains are actually super helpful. And then in some people, having certain strains will actually help with dairy intolerance, for example. And the more I read about it, and there was actually one recent study that somebody sent me, and they were like, "Oh, this type of probiotic did not help at all for constipation," but they only tested one strain on one small group of people, And I think what we're going to find is that the gut microbiome is so complex. There's more and more evidence coming out on it every day, is that the way to do it is like what we've always been taught. You want to have a wide variety of fruits and vegetables and, the whole rainbow of colors. You're going to want to have a wide variety of good bacteria in your gut so that we can encounter or deal with anything that we encounter, like coming.
Yes, for sure, Dr. Fong. And I also think that approach is the wisest. That's what served me really great for many years. And I also know from friends and family who've switched their diet from processed foods and just the kind of stuff that's convenient but not really great for our health, and or have become more mindful. And it impacts all health, all aspects of your health. Um, what are your thoughts on fecal transplants?
Mhm. Yeah. So when I was working in New York City, we actually were one of the first centers to do fecal microbial transplants for patients with C. diff infections. And it seemed to work, right? So it honestly seemed to work. And we have tons of stories from when I was in training about how people would be like, how do you do a fecal microbial transplant? You just bring in a bag of poop and you put it in. And in the early days, you really did put it in a blender, blend it up, and then inject it through a colonoscopy. It's obviously we've progressed quite a bit in the last 8 or 9 years or so. And there's rebiota, there's pills that you can take with different types of basically good bacteria in it. I think it's going to be good. I don't think that it's going to be like a standard treatment. So like anybody who is not having a good gut day is just going to go in and get a fecal microbial transplant. I think it's going to still be reserved, at least initially, for very sick people with inflammatory bowel disease, infectious bowel diseases. But someday it might be that we all just have to have a good amount of bacteria from what your local regional sources. One very good example I always think about is they did a study where there was one, I think it was like an adult who had a twin. And so the adult had a bowel problem, and obviously the fecal microbiome was all completely off. And so they used the twins' stool for a fecal microbial transplant, and it worked because they were in the same environment, but this one had the healthy gut and this one had the bad gut. And it's just, it has to be somebody who's probably related to you, probably living around the same area, and you're just getting the good bacteria that you need while you're living in that region.
And so, such a fecal transplant, let's say for people who are really dealing with major issues, such as you have described, is it a sustainable treatment? As in, does it last? And if so, do these individuals also have to adjust, for example, their diet, or is it something that will only bring relief for a short time?
The studies that I've seen, they were 85% effective for up to 6 months follow-up, which is fairly good. And after that, I would say you do have to change your diet, right? So you actually still get off the processed foods, still start taking probiotics and changing your gut microbiome, because not only will you have had a fecal microbial transplant, you probably, if you were that sick, were on a ton of antibiotics. And so you're going to have to change the entire composition of your body to become, better than you were and possibly superhuman, right?
Yes, Dr. Fong. And for those who may have reservations as oh, fecal transplant, poop transplant, it is a completely safe and sterilized in certain ways process,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes. Actually, that's a very good point. It's safe, it's sterilized, it's standardized. Like I said, it comes in a capsule, but even if you do it through a colonoscopy, the stool is screened through the lab. It's screened for all infectious diseases and then screened again so that you can't actually get, it's very low risk of getting like an infectious disease from the stool transplant.
Yes, and I actually saw this was, gosh, sometime within the last year, I think, a post somewhere from a company who was actually searching individuals who could be donors, stool donors, which could then be processed into medicine, into fecal transplant material. And I was really curious about that. I think, if I remember correctly, they offered like $10,000 to $15,000 and went into the screening process, and it was very detailed and intense. I was like, yeah, they're really serious about this. This is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the open biome, I think, is the one that it's called. And they have this giant stool bank. I think it's the biggest one in the US, but it is very intense. Like the screening is, you can't have had anything ever with your gut, like not even diverticular disease, which is not thought to be infectious, but it can be hereditary. So if there's anything wrong, you're out.
So maybe an incentive for those that are parents to really make sure the GI of their
That's
children
true.
is doing really well, because they could at some point make a lot of money by being helpers
From
for
just donating your
by
poop.
just pooping and being
Yeah.
healthy. Cool. I love it.
That's a good point. But that plus, if you were a child and you were younger, not that I would want to make children do anything like that and exploit them, but if you're younger and you haven't had any diseases yet, that's probably also a good source, right? The same reason that children are a good source of stem cells, because they really haven't had anything
Right.
yet. Yeah.
If I had kids, I would totally, if they were up for it, have them poop as much as they want.
The funny thing is, being a colorectal surgeon and having written this book, my kids poop very well. I know that other parents have problems with kids with constipation, but fortunately, knock on wood, I just never have. From a very young age, the two of them, they eat vegetables, they eat salmon, they eat like the weirdest things. My daughter's favorite food is broccoli, which I know is like unheard of for a child. But it's great. I'm like, I hope she keeps this up into her adulthood and it's not just she likes it now. We started when she was 4 months old. We were like, here, eat this. It's normal to eat vegetables, and just encouraged it that way.
Beautiful. Yes. And I think children pick up so much of what the adults do, not what they say.
Yeah.
And learning, I to this day, when I was a child, it was a normal part of every meal that we would have a green salad. It was very rare that we wouldn't have a green salad, no matter what we ate, whether we had
Right.
pasta, whether we had meat and potatoes, whether we had, it didn't matter. There was 95% of the time, there was a big bowl of greens on the table. And to this day, I don't feel a meal is complete if I don't have a salad with it. It's just something that's become
That's actually excellent. Like, I feel like there should become some kind of a movement where, like, you would just add a salad to your meal, any kind of vegetable. Yeah, I usually recommend cooked vegetables, because I think a lot of people who are like, oh my God, I hate salads, I don't want vegetables. Cooked vegetables are a good entry point. So, cooked broccoli, cooked spinach. My favorite is sweet potato, because sweet potatoes are like a potato. So, if you need to eat it, there's both soluble and insoluble fiber. You can make it sweet or savory. I've told my patients that, and a lot of them have had success with just start with sweet potatoes.
That's an excellent tip, Dr. Fong. Thank you. Yes, I love them. My goodness, they're so, and cooked potato. You can just make pan vegetables. You just throw the broccoli on a pan, put whatever seasoning you like, olive oil over it. You don't even have to do much work. You can even, not ideal, but I do it too. You can buy the bagged broccoli florets. You don't even have to cut anything. It literally takes 5 minutes of preparation. And when it comes out of the oven, it's so good.
It's really good. That's one of our favorite ways to make it. And I will admit that I buy the cut up broccoli, because if I don't, then if I have to cut it up, I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to cut it up. And I waste it. So I'm like, if I buy the like cut up, I will use it. And every night we just throw it on sheet pan, 40 minutes, a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, olive oil. Delicious, like crispy.
Exactly. It's really cool. And I'm with you 100% too. I rather do something that I know is not 100% ideal, but way better than not eating it at all. Already cut florets it is, and so I have tons of vegetable and it's easy. Especially like yourself, you're super busy with your practice. You have 2 children, so whatever makes it easier to get those good vegetables in. When we talk about constipation and people dealing with constipation, oftentimes they may not realize that it actually could potentially mask some really serious health conditions like colorectal cancer. Could you share what red flags or symptoms people should watch for that differentiate ordinary constipation from something more serious?
Very good question. I get this question all the time. Like, people are constipated and they come in saying, hey, do I need a colonoscopy? Is this something more serious? The majority of the time, about 80% of the time, it really is run of the mill constipation and it's not anything else. But the red flags that I look for are, the most important one, I think, is actually unintentional weight loss. Because everybody's trying to lose weight these days. But if you do have some kind of cancer or neoplasm growing in your body, you will lose weight no matter how much you're trying to gain weight, because it just eats away at your fuel, right? Unintentional weight loss, rectal bleeding with the constipation, bleeding that doesn't stop. So constipation is pretty much correlated with hemorrhoids and anal fissures. And so you would expect occasional bleeding from hemorrhoids, which tends to last for 2 or 3 days, but then stops on its own, and it can be painless bleeding. But if it's persistent bleeding going on for weeks and weeks, dark tarry stools, which was a sign of digested blood versus bright red blood, that's the second alarm sign that I would say. So unintentional weight loss, bright red blood. And then, so in addition to constipation, you can actually also have obstipation. So where you're not passing gas. If the tumor is big enough in your colon that you're not having stool and not passing gas either, feeling super bloated all the time, that would be the next thing I look for. And then obviously going down like the history and physical, we talk about family history. If you've had any relevant cancers, any first degree relatives with colorectal cancer, or like related cancers like breast or ovarian, prostate. Yeah. But those are the 3 main things.
Got it. Thank you for that, Dr. Fong. And talking about, for example, intentional weight loss. And a lot of these new methods with the peptides, whatever their brand names are from the
Yeah.
Mounjaro, whatnot.
Wegovy, Ozempic. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. What are your thoughts on those? As far as I know, they also affect the digestive system. Ozempic, I think, slows down what happens naturally in your GI. What do you think?
Correct. Correct. It slows down digestion and it slows down absorption. So the GLP-1 agonists, we've also seen this a lot in the past year and a half. People come in and be like, oh, like suddenly I started getting constipated like 6 months ago. I'm like, what started 6 months ago? And they're like, oh, I started Ozempic or Wegovy or Mounjaro. And I'm like, oh, that's why. It literally slows down your digestion. And so you can't poop. Now, I'm just going to throw in there that it has mixed effects on the digestive system. From what I've seen in all the literature, it's about a 14% chance of diarrhea, and about a 7 to 10% chance of constipation. So it's actually slightly more diarrhea than constipation, because if it's slowing down absorption of all the fluids and everything you eat, you're actually having like more liquidy stool go through. But in a subset of people, it actually slows it down so that things are just not moving through at all. There's actually a secondary reason why people who are on GLP-1 agonists have constipation, which is that they're not eating. So when you're not eating, you have nothing to poop out. And this is actually very common. I'll be like, are you even eating? And one of my patients was like, yeah, I had the McDonald's chicken wrap today, like one of those teeny tiny wraps. I'm like, if that's all you ate, you have no bulk that to poop out. And they're like, oh yeah. So like you just, even though it also suppresses your appetite, you're like, I don't want to eat, and you lose like 12 pounds in 2 weeks or whatever. It's also that there's nothing to poop out, and so therefore you're not pooping, and then you can be a little more miserable. So what I counsel patients is actually we're going back to basics like fiber, water. If you are eating, it might be better to eat something that's like whole foods, grains, cooked vegetables, rather than a fried chicken wrap, which has like very little nutritional value and does not move through the colon easily.
And your general take on these GLP-1 agonists, Dr. Fong?
Honestly, I think that they're okay, and they've been proven to help with diabetes. They do help with weight loss, even though rebound is common, like after stopping the injection. I think that if it's what people need to feel better and to kickstart a healthier lifestyle, that's all right. I just don't know right now. I don't think we have enough data about the long-term effects of using it for weight loss. And so that's why I'm always like, if you're going to use it, just preempt all these other symptoms by getting on a good bowel regimen so that you won't be completely miserable.
And also, ideally, implement the type of diet that will help you keep the results up long term. So you don't have to stay on these injections forever.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, a friend of ours, he successfully started, Ozempic was the brand name, and he lost a ton of weight, and then he stopped it after half a year, and he put back on the weight and then some. So he got back on it. It has been very helpful for him. It also, I've read some new studies coming out that indicate that these may also help with addiction. In his case, he actually on a daily basis drank a lot of alcohol. It's really curbed his alcohol consumption. So
Oh,
that's just on a side note. That's not
yeah.
really our topic, but it's interesting. I'm not against them. I just think it needs to be part of a very holistic, targeted lifestyle intervention in order to also,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I would not say that I'm against them, but I don't necessarily recommend them either. But if people are on them, I agree. Like it has to be part of the whole lifestyle behavioral change. So if you're still eating McDonald's chicken wraps afterwards, it's not going to change anything. But using it as a kickstart, like as a platform on the way to wellness, I think would work. But that's really
Yes.
interesting about the alcohol. I haven't seen that,
Yes.
so I'm
And
gonna look
other
at it.
addictions too. Yeah, it's fascinating. I need to look more into that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Huh? Yeah. And to get back to constipation, Dr. Fong, when people are dealing with chronic constipation, at what point do you recommend to them to actually stop self-managing and seek out a specialist such as yourself?
I think as soon as they're having problems. So as soon as you're like, okay, this has been going on for more than 3 or 4 days for one episode, and or you develop anorectal conditions like hemorrhoids, fissures, fistulas, and whatnot, and then all of the alarm symptoms that we mentioned. So like the weight loss, the bleeding and the bloating and being unable to fart or pass gas as well. I would just seek help sooner rather than later because I think a lot of people struggle. A lot of people will self-medicate. They see the ads for Miralax and be like, I'll try that without knowing the underlying problems. Again, if you're not eating a great diet, you can't poop out a bad diet. That's one of the chapters in my book is you can throw Miralax on top of it all you want. It's not going to work. You still really have to start adjusting your diet, you start increasing your water intake, and then doing all these other things. And then Miralax is a route to have smoother bowel movements as long as like the foundation is in place.
Yes, for sure. And I can relate to people who are just, they're used and literally addicted to a diet that is not supportive of their health. There's literally so many things in these processed foods that it's very hard to let go of on so many
Yeah.
different levels, from the psychological comfort derived from them to the actual ingredients that keep
Yeah.
you hooked on them. And I think it's also really important to move away from any kind of shame that one has about that, because often the shame keeps us stuck in the place instead of just saying, okay, this is what I'm doing. How does this actually help me? Because it could be comforting me psychologically. It could be doing all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right. Now I know what this is doing. It's okay.
Yeah.
How can I implement things that are actually better for me and that still give me the benefits that
Yeah.
I'm seeking, whatever that
No,
may be?
100%. And I always tell my patients there's no shame in what you're doing. I love junk food and a hamburger as much as anybody. And it's a goal. It's not like you have to do this right away and then or else you failed. So like it's all for all of us, it's a goal that we have to attain a healthy bowel movement every day, 1 to 3 times a day or so. If you're doing good like 85% of the time, my mission is that to get everybody on the path so that once your GI system is working well, it just keeps chugging along. Like we said earlier, even if you have a bad day or two once in a month, once every couple months, it should be on autopilot. Like you shouldn't have to think about it for the rest of your life. And easy ways to start are just add one fruit and vegetable at every meal. I don't care if you like McDonald's. I love chicken nuggets from McDonald's. But make sure you have an apple in the morning. Make sure you have a salad with your lunch. Make sure you have some steamed asparagus or broccoli at dinner. Like just starting with these baby steps will eventually get you there.
Absolutely. And just starting to slowly feel better.
Yeah.
That's in itself, the body then starts to self-adjust,
Feel
and
more.
usually one starts craving more of that
Yes.
goodness. It's very interesting. Yeah.
And it's also hard to explain that once your body starts feeling good, you will keep doing it the same way that people who exercise will continue to exercise, right? Because you get the endorphins and you keep wanting to do it more. Once you're on the path, people get there and then they get it. I also caution though, like everything in the book, I'm always like everything in moderation because again, I don't want you to drink too much water and then you get hyponatremic and then or you get too much fiber and you have the fiber stool balls and some blockage like we talked about, or even too much exercise, right? So too much exercise stimulates like a fight or flight response in your body is I don't want to digest anything, and then you can actually slow down your digestive system as well. I have people who say, hey, I run 5 miles a day, like why can't I poop? Or running is actually a bad example because running actually makes people poop more. Okay, I do like hardcore HIIT workouts for 3 hours a day. That actually can slow down the digestive system a little bit
Makes
as well. Yeah.
totally, yes. And fiber stool balls, that's my word of the day.
It's called a Bezoar.
Oh, what?
A Bezoar. Bezoar, a Bezoar.
Bezoar. That sounds like some kind of extraterrestrial.
It is a Bezoar, and I always in my book I talk about it because in Harry Potter, I don't know if you're a fan of those books, but
Yes.
they talk about Bezoars, and they used to be in the olden days thought to be a ball of like hair and fiber and stuff like that is stuck in stomachs, and sometimes like a goat stomach, and it actually works to like trap a bunch of poisons and stuff like that. So that's how they use it in fiction. And in real life, it's a similar thing. A Bezoar is like a fibrous like ball that's stuck in your GI
Mm,
tract.
fascinating.
Yep, there's your fact of the day.
I love it. And Dr. Fong, in your book, actually includes recipes for managing constipation. Could you share a bit about the kinds of foods you recommend and why these specific foods and ingredients are beneficial for digestive health?
Yeah, so I shared a couple of like easy recipes that my family just actually we actually eat it all the time, so nothing crazy. So avocado tomato toast, for example, the tomatoes are very good for you, tons of vitamins, lecithin, and then avocados have, let me see, I'm gonna blank now. I think it's 4 grams of fiber per half an avocado. So if you eat a whole avocado, it's between for a big avocado, it's between 8 and 11 grams of fiber, which is pretty good. And so fiber, good fats, all of that helps with your bowels, and then having that on a piece of whole grain toast. The recipe that I'm most proud of, though, is one that I made up from a blend of some family recipes and some recipes I've seen online. It's a like a clean protein chicken meatball soup that has a ton of fiber in it. It's got, let's see, 31 grams of protein from eggs and chicken, ground chicken, and then it has 8 grams of fiber from processed carrots, celery, onion, and then I throw in either a handful of spinach or Napa cabbage or bok choy into it. And then all of that, plus there's also a ton of fluids. So my kids love it because the meatballs are like tender and juicy and easy to eat. My wife loves it because like she can take it to work and not feel like she's having a super heavy meal, but is like filling because it has all this protein and fiber. And then it's like relatively, it actually has 0 processed carbs in it, like no sugar and only a little bit of salt. I had it the other night and I don't know why it's so good. It's just really good.
And soups are a really great way to eat.
We
So
love
there's cultures that
Yeah.
actually have soups and savory foods in the morning.
Yeah.
And apparently it's a really great way to start the day.
Because just think about all the fluids you're getting. Like it's like a cup or two of fluids that you're starting with. And in general, I recommend to my patients like start with a cup or two of warm water in the morning, and that'll get your GI tract going. Some people want to put like a slice of lemon in it, if you want to put tea in it or coffee, but really it's the warm water that gets everything going. And yeah, soup is great for that.
Yes, and an alternative is also to just actually have warm water, not hot, with some lemon juice and maybe some spices like cayenne pepper. I like to do that every once in a while.
Exactly. Yep. Or like some people do a little teaspoon of apple cider vinegar,
Yeah.
but the warm water is very good for you.
Yes, 100%. And Dr. Fong, this has been a really delightful conversation. And I am German born. I may be a little bit of an outlier, but in general, Germans are known for their predilection, their liking to talking about poop, all things
Yeah.
poop.
Yeah. No,
Not
and I totally appreciate you having me. Like, I just think it's, like I said, I love talking about this. And the more that we get it out there, that it's okay to talk about it and we can normalize it a little bit more.
Absolutely, Dr. Fong. And for people who would like to learn more about you, about your work, or would like to reach out to you, how can they do so?
Yeah, my website is www.carmenfong.com. And there's also a webpage for the book right now, www.constipationnation.com. Either way, you can reach me. You can also find me in all of the social media outlets, and people love to ask me messages on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But we love to help educate. So
Super. Excellent, Dr. Fong, and much gratitude to you for sharing your knowledge and your deep expertise in such an easy to digest manner.
that was a good one. That's the best one I've heard so far.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much
much
for
for
coming
having
on
me.
the show.